Hi everyone, I'm Gary Null, and I'd like to welcome you once again to our Progressive Commentary Hour and our conversations with remarkable minds. Today the topic is the corruption of vaccine science. But we've been told all vaccines are safe and effective. By whom? And what proof? It's difficult to be a scientist or a physician or public health official and to start a conversation before you have evidence the foundation of that conversation has been proven solid. And we're almost always starting our conversations or asking a question beyond the actual progenitor, where we should have. For example, if someone says, get your vaccine, it's flu season. Well, in point of fact, there's no such thing as flu season. There is vitamin D, vitamin C, deficiency syndrome and season, because for those of us who are completely healthy and exercise, de-stress, don't work in toxic environments, take a good healthy meal each day and juicing, well, we don't end up with the flu. And there's a lot of us, tens of millions. But if they gave 100 million people the flu vaccine and 90 million didn't get the flu, they're giving 100% of the reasons why to the vaccine. That's not science. That's complete nonsense, because you're not taking into consideration, would you live in a northern climate in the wintertime where you're not getting adequate sunlight? Or do you live in Florida or California, Arizona, Texas, where you're getting plenty of sunlight? Are you into health or not? Are you sedentary or not? Are you stressed or not? Do you have any compounding conditions such as, let's say, lupus or autoimmune diseases? That will impact your immune system. How about your gut biome? Is it healthy? Is your mouth biome healthy? Skin biome healthy? Because if they're not, that directly impacts your immune system. Were you asked any of those questions about your immune system prior to taking the vaccine? The answer is no. And yet, we take 100% of the responsibility if there's an adverse effect. They take none. In fact, they're so sure of the safety and efficacy, they simply said, you've got to indemnify us, none of us, from Bill Gates to Anthony Fauci. You can't sue us if you are injured or are killed. We take no responsibility. So then don't we have a right to discuss the actual science, not proprietary science, not corporate science, big pharma science? No. So to bring on the program today to discuss this in depth is an MD and PhD. She's board certified in internal medicine, and she has a PhD in pathology, and she is a scholar in her field. Her name is Dr. Anais Maria Mihalcea, Mihalcea. She has a very strong background. She has a background in biophysics. She has over 25 years of clinical experience. She is the president of AM Medical LLC, which is an anti-aging clinic dedicated to the reversal of all diseases. She is the award-winning author of the book Light Medicine, A New Paradigm, The Science of Light, Spirit, and Longevity. She has written two best-selling books, Transhuman, The Real COVID-19 Agenda, Volume 1, and Transhuman, Overcoming the Depopulation Agenda, Volume 2. She writes Humanity United Now. It's a newsletter on Substack, very important, which discusses topics like the dangers of COVID's vaccines, long COVID, vaccine injury reversal. Yes, you heard me right. There are protocols to help stop the production of spike protein, to help the self-organizing nanolipids from organizing and creating white clots that can kill you. And also, she challenges the self-assembly nanotechnology and more. And her website on Substack is Anais Mihalcea, MD, PhD.substack.com. By the way, her research has been used for the Ban the Jabs resolution passed in 11 GOP counties and was a significant part of 25 national ARM grand jury petitions for crimes against humanity and evidence for Dr. Joseph Sansone's writ of mandamus, Florida court filing declaring COVID-19 injections as weapons of mass destruction and requesting immediate removal from the market. She also has closely collaborated with other litigators like international attorney Todd Callinger, Esquire, as expert witness. And by the way, before you think, well, why would she suggest that this was a weapon of mass destruction? It was just a vaccine that went wrong in some way. No. How many labs do you know of, or the media talked about, or Congress investigated? 2. Wuhan in China and Ralph Barrick's lab in North Carolina. Oh, that's it? No, there are 400 others. 400. And they're there for one reason only, to produce a virus or bacteria that can be weaponized and therefore cause massive injury and death that's easily spread. Why would they do that? Well, ask her. Nice to have you with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much.
I'm interested in this topic. I've written over 40 articles, produced a documentary on it, but now we can look back. We have the advantage of that. And what I'm seeing is I'm seeing for the first time in scientific and medical literature history, hundreds of peer-reviewed articles being retracted by the authors. The question is, why would they want to retract an article that was published in a prestigious journal? And I want to see that addressed. But also, we're seeing thousands of new articles showing that virtually everything we were told about COVID, vaccine and COVID, was wrong. And yet we were not allowed to challenge it. In fact, it got so bad that virtually all of the major social media platforms, Facebook, Google, Wikipedia, if you said anything that challenged them, even if you could prove you were right, and you were a scientist, an MD and PhD, you would be censored. You'd be vilified. I called it and wrote an article on it, medical McCarthyism. And it was vile and vicious. The New York Times profiled 12 people and said, the disinformation dozen, the paper of record, was not being forthright and honest. But those people's reputations were virtually destroyed. Their source of income was destroyed. I want to get into that. What happens to a person who has the courage to show something is wrong, has the science and medical background to prove it, has the hard evidence, and for that truth, they're destroyed. You may want to use anything that might have happened to you in this process, but you're not alone. Virtually every scientist, physician, every journalist, activist, anyone in the media who dared to challenge Fauci and Collins and Walensky, etc., they were all attacked. But then we have to look at this. Was it not the Supreme Court who stated that there is no such thing as a safe vaccines because they're all inherently unsafe? All of them. And how many times did we start our journey in medicine, or as a school teacher, as a pharmacist, as a nurse, the people who would possibly advocate for vaccines? You got to have a vaccine, you can't come in my classroom. Got to have a vaccine, you can't come in this restaurant. Can't travel on this airplane. But they started with the assumption that there was no other way of protecting yourself or others, and the vaccines were absolutely safe and effective, 95%. They were all wrong. And I'd like you to go through and show us what was wrong with the vaccine that is most popular now, as far as how many people took it, over 72% of the American population, and then how many took multiple vaccinations. I'm dealing with one now. I just got this person's blood chemistry, and it's horrific. And what about all the other vaccines? We were told with absolute certainty you have to have the polio vaccine. Well, I have a video of the godfather of all vaccines in America, invented the most vaccines, Hilleman, Maurice. Near his death, he gave an interview, and he was very flippant about, we found the SV40, simian virus 40, in all of our samples. So I had to go tell Sabin, Dr. Sabin, who brought out the Sabin vaccine, they're going to cause cancer. And they did this like it was a joke. Well, how many millions of people ended up with cancer? And sure enough, there was the SV40 virus. and nothing was done. There was no public announcement of what to do and who was responsible. But he acknowledged this in this interview. But then Dr. Eva Sneed, who I had on my program probably 30 times back in the 1970s, she was the first physician to blow the whistle. There was one before who didn't make national attention. Mary's Monkeys, she was known as. You may have heard of her. In any case, because she found when she was looking at the monkeys that all the monkeys, the green tree monkey, the kidneys, had SV40 in it, was a contaminant. In any case, we've had bad science, corrupt science, and the very first major vaccines given in America all had to be withdrawn immediately because the side effects were so terrible. And yet, back about 45 years ago, one vaccine had about 20 to 30 people die from it, and immediately it was withdrawn from the market. About 40 million Americans had been vaccinated with it. They would withdraw it instantly. Mike Douglas did a segment on 60 Minutes on it, showing the corruption of the agencies. Today, no vaccine is withdrawn from the market, almost an impossibility, no matter what the science shows its safety and efficacy is. The people promoting all this keep their jobs. As of today, not a single person has been held legally responsible in a court of law for all this. And yet we're talking about all the scientists working in the labs, promoting biological weapons, and which can then only cause a public health disaster. None held accountable. No one wants to open that door. A few have tried, but they stopped short. So take us on a journey now, if you would please, through how corporate corruption and political agendas and unmitigated greed, even something as simple as we were told, if you have COVID and you're not manifesting symptoms, you're asymptomatic, don't worry. Well, what about vaccine shedding? What about the persistence of synthetic RNA in 88% of vaccinated individuals and 50% of unvaccinated women? We see images of rubbery clots from autopsies and surgeries, and yet we were told that's not important. So no stories, no media. The danger of a known carcinogen, SV40, and why it was found in COVID-19 vaccines, that's why I mentioned it, despite it's not listed as an ingredient. So speak on the turbo cancers, where on Monday you have an inflamed breast. True story, a nurse of 22 years, her husband's a physician, and at the farmer's market, she says, Gary, have you ever heard of someone having on Saturday a completely normal breast, but as of this morning, my entire breast is beet red and painful? I said, your husband's a physician, what's he say? He says, he doesn't know. Well, go in immediately and get yourself tested, get cancer markers, get this viewed, and let's see what you got. Well, she did. On Friday, she had stage 4 breast cancer. Now, I work with her, and she no longer has any cancer, but I'm thinking how many people today are having cancers that were in remission and now are back. Children, teenagers with pancreatic cancer, colorectal cancer, never seen that before. So, define the turbo cancers and why we should be very concerned. And the motivation behind the vaccine ID cards as more of a social, political, rather than a medical agenda. We've got to bring that into the discussion. And finally, we see the end of the conventional vaccine model that was based on cultured, live, attenuated, or killed viruses, and a term for so-called vaccines based on gene therapy, which means they're not a traditional vaccine. It's genetic engineering, like the RNA vaccines. Now that Bill Gates is promoting all kinds of vaccines and medicines should come from that. So why should we worry? That gives you a lot of different areas to talk about. Take your time and go through all of them that you feel comfortable discussing. The forum is yours.
So let's start with this idea of science. Science is to be an open forum of discussion, discovery, exploration to come up with new paradigms. When science becomes a religion of the Middle Ages, so what happened in the Middle Ages is that any heretic was burnt at the stake and their lives were destroyed. So the modern version of this is cancellation, threats by an absolute governmental, medical, pharma, military, industrial complex, because we have to understand that the entire COVID rollout was a military operation, and that all of the medical boards, the FDA, the CDC, they all gave out this mandate to the clinicians that they were to not question in any way this fantastic rollout of the salvation of humanity against this pandemic. And so doctors were threatened if they were questioning why they should inject a medication where the pamphlet leaf was empty. There was no information regarding side effects or risk. And informed consent is something that any clinician has to give. So in the Hippocratic Oath, the guidelines of ethics of any clinician is to do no harm. In order to do no harm, one has to use discernment and inform oneself and in the same modality, the patient, of the risks and benefits of any therapeutic interventions. And this was completely shut down in a way that was, even medical boards were threatening any clinician that would speak out against this publicly. They would lose their license, which is their livelihood. You know, to become a doctor, that takes many, many years. And so to lose your license and your ability to earn a financial means is a direct attack against survival. So it is an indirect way of burning at the stake, in a sense. And this happened internationally to brave clinicians, and regardless of what their view of the COVID injections was, because each one came from their understanding, their research, which was extremely limited. Remember, we were not allowed to look at the COVID vials. We did so at great personal risk. Laboratories that we asked if they would investigate these COVID injections and tell us through very advanced testing what was in it, they wouldn't do it. And so it was a very hostile environment. So this regimented fear of the propaganda against people who would have the knowledge base to question the narrative, the very harsh attack against us and the censorship was part of an enormous psychological warfare operation on humanity. And what I asked myself was the why. Why is this happening? And in my research, I came across the World Economic Forum, who in their strategic development of the fourth industrial revolution put vaccination at the center of cybersecurity, of travel, of global collaboration, of scientific progress, of the Internet of Bodies and Internet of Things. And I wanted to understand, how on earth is it possible that a vaccine should be the foundation of a complete social restructuring? There has to be something more with this vaccine. So while other clinicians, they were exploring the mRNA, the spike protein and its dangers, I was looking also at the technological platform, because in the Presidential Nanotechnology Initiative, the COVID-19 injections were featured as one of the great achievement in nanotechnology. And so I wanted to understand what that really means. So these lipid nanoparticles actually have had the ability to do a lot more than just carry mRNA. So this is part of what's called synthetic biology, where technology is being merged with a biological intention. And so what was very interesting is that in the early phase, there were nanotechnological literature that showed that the genetic sequence of the spike protein within the COVID-19 injection, as well as the virus, they were the same, that at a pH of 4, it would create amyloid, which is something that 100% of vaccinated people are now having within their bloodstream as determined by clinicians. But at a pH of 7, which the pH of the human body is 7.4, it will create hydrogel. So what hydrogel is, MIT denoted that hydrogel is the structural form of the brain-computer interface of how to merge human biology with technology, and ultimately then expanding on this around the world. People were finding that the vaccinated individuals, that metallic objects were sticking to them, and they were absolutely laughed at, including all of the scientists who said, well, wait a minute, why is this happening? And then again, if science is all about endeavoring to understand something, a phenomenon, the other aspect that was happening was that the vaccinated individuals were emitting MAC addresses, media access control addresses, from within their bodies that could be picked up with a cell phone, with a Bluetooth scanner, and even were emitting from the grave sites of deceased COVID-19 injected individuals. So here we have a phenomenon where, number one, people were sometimes dying within 30 minutes of an injection. And I would like to call this not a vaccine injection, but that's an execution. And at this point, when this came forward, we should have, exactly as you said, completely stopped the COVID-19 vaccination program and asked, why did these people suddenly die? Within 24, 48 hours of the injections, we had extreme mortality rates, including people having neurological damage, extreme symptoms of brain fog, cardiac problems like myocarditis in young people, sudden cardiac death of the athlete on the field. So there was an aspect of this that clearly led to an enormous amount of deaths that were not investigated, regardless of who the clinician was who asked for investigation. And it was, in fact, the author of the United States biological weapons laws, Dr. Francis Boyle, who's now deceased, who first declared the COVID-19 injections weapons of biological and technological weapons of mass destruction. And this statement by this esteemed professor was actually used by us and Dr. Sansone in legal arguments and court cases to ban the mRNA injections, because what he was saying, it's like, look, if you look at it from a militarized perspective, you see all of these people dying. It's and this is a weapon. This is something that was designed and isn't being investigated, but there is an ulterior motive here. So the tremendous force of the pharma industrial complex to shut down anybody who was questioning was tremendous, because they were using the force of these boards, medical boards, which we know, for example, the American Board of Pediatrics and the American Society of Pediatrics, which is still, even against the recommendation of the CDC recommending the COVID-19 injections in young children, their funding comes from Pfizer, their funding comes from Moderna. So how do you reconcile this? So in my journey, the other aspect of the research was the connection to DARPA. So DARPA is obviously a military institution, and in 2013, they actually gave more than $25 million to Moderna to develop the mRNA technology. Moderna, before that, was not a pharmaceutical company. It was a weapons company. And so later, DARPA also engaged Pfizer. And for example, in 2015, Pfizer engaged Ido Balanchet from Israel. He was a researcher in DNA microrobots, and he explained that in one syringe he could put 1,000 billion DNA robots. And so Pfizer had hired him to do research on DNA robotics. And so what was very interesting in then our research, I worked with an international team and myself got a dark field microscope and looked myself at the Pfizer BioNTech vials. And just looking at the drop under the microscope, you see millions and millions of what they call nanoparticles, but they have intelligence. And we observed these to self-assemble technology, microtechnology, microchips, micro antennas. And so what I did, for example, in my office is that I observed the self-assembly over time and continued to document the complex structures that were being assembled. And at the same time in my office, I was warning people about shedding. You had mentioned this phenomenon. So all vaccines shed. That's been actually shown, and it's well noted in the pharmaceutical literature that, aspects of virus particles actually shed from the vaccinated to the unvaccinated. But what was very interesting was that even early on, I was seeing in my clinic phenomena of where unvaccinated women, for example, started extremely heavy bleeding, even in postmenopausal women. And then I started seeing turbo cancer in the unvaccinated. And what happened was that I started doing live blood analysis with a dark field microscope in my office, and it turned out that the same nanostructures, nanorobots, which appeared as these blinking lights, were self-assembling microchips and polymer filaments the exact same way as I documented in the COVID vials. So I wasn't the only one who was documenting this, and this is why I wrote the 2 books, Transhuman. Around the world, brave doctors and researchers documented these strange findings in the blood. For example, an early study from Italy looked at 1,006 patients who had received the mRNA vaccine, and over, I believe it was 84%, had very strange filaments and technology within their blood that they very early on documented. Then there was the German scientific group, and they actually did mass spectroscopy on the COVID vials and also documented very strange metallic objects that looked like microchips. They found many undeclared metals that are used for semiconductor technology. Then there were two brave scientist groups. One was Dr. Marcela Sangorin and Dr. Lorena de Blasi, which I consider one of the top experts in the world because they are PhD in biotechnologies at the University of Nagajú in Argentina. And they looked at COVID vials, vaccine vials from around the world, including Sputnik, Sinopharm, AstraZeneca, Moderna, Pfizer. And they found 55 undeclared elements, including lanthanides. Lanthanides are paramagnetic, so it can explain why the people who were injected were becoming magnetic. They're also fluorescent, and they are used for semiconductor nanotechnology to build microchips. So they even found neodymium. Neodymium is the strongest magnetic substance on planet Earth. They also found radioactive elements like uranium and cesium. Now, what on earth is uranium doing in the vaccination? And do these toxic heavy metals, which I am a chelation specialist, I am certified in detoxifying heavy metals from people. So it's been shown in many clinical trials that metals are cumulatively toxic. So if you have aluminum, if you have, things like hafnium, strontium, barium within the human body, it causes DNA damage, increases cancer risk. Antimony increases the risk of congestive heart failure, has been directly correlated. Lead, cadmium, arsenic is correlated with an increase in cardiovascular disease and arteriosclerosis. And so that was of a huge interest, because why was this in all of the shots? And the other aspect of this was an investigation of childhood vaccines by nanopathologist Antoinetta Gatti from Italy. She, in 2017, published a mass spectroscopy, very elaborate investigation of 44 different childhood vaccines that all contained undeclared metals, not just aluminum, but steel, silver, all kinds of metals like nickel, mercury, etc. She also had been vehemently attacked, even though her credentials were impeccable. So this aspect to include undeclared toxic metals, for example, has been going on for a long time. And then what I did was I actually got all of the childhood vaccines. I looked at MMR, I looked at HPV, I looked at pneumovax, the influenza vaccines, and meningococcus, tetanus, Tdap, all of these things. And I found and documented through my very humble dark field microscope that all of them were self-assembling technology. So then this is such a huge find, now corroborated by so many clinicians and scientists around the world. There was another study published in the International Journal of Vaccine Research by Dr. Youngmi Lee. She is a gynecologist who works in vitro fertilization in South Korea. She documented per ml of COVID injections about about 3,000 nanoparticles and showed over a period of 2 years how they continued to self-assemble, how they were extremely toxic to male sperm, as well as red blood cells, causing rouleau formation and destruction of the red blood cells, something that we've seen through microscopy around the world, and we are asserting is correlated with extreme fatigue and brain fog that people are having. So she also, for example, documented experiments with 5G Wi-Fi routers and showed that just 30 seconds of exposure, for example, to a Wi-Fi router was increasing the growth of this technology substantially. So there was a correlation also at the same time with the 5G rollout, because if we understand that now, going back to the WEF and vaccination in the center of the fourth industrial revolution and what's called the Internet of Bodies, meaning the biometric surveillance of all things on Earth, every microbe, every cell on Earth, every plant, every wildlife, that biosensors called smart dust would actually give information to the cloud to create what's called a metaverse. It turns out that the engineers are creating digital twins through artificial intelligence that is being fed data. So we are data points, and we are also batteries to this technology. And it's been shown, for example, again, in nanotechnology literature, that the interbody area network is using our blood as energy harvesting. This is what I've shown with the microscope, and in my studies with Clifford Carnicum, we've shown that the electrical conductivity of human blood has decreased by up to 47%. What is doing that? Well, it turns out our red blood cells have something called the zeta potential, which is very much related to the capacity to bind oxygen, and it's also related to the bioelectric and biophysical capacity to conduct electricity. All of our cellular processes are electric. And so it turns out that these nano and micro robots are harvesting in order to propel themselves within the blood to be able to go to these different places within the body, are harvesting our blood from energy sources. So we found this with different methodologies in the blood. It is absolutely irrelevant what aspect of these discoveries you endorse or don't endorse. The fact that they are present and that someone is finding this, from the aspect of the spike protein, the mRNA, the SV40 contamination within the vials, which is also SV40 has been long used in nanotechnology. The fact that any of this is present should raise the alarm and should have these COVID injections get off the market. So the discovery process of inconvenient truth that is found to be verified in national literature, including the Nanotechnology Initiative, including, for example, the Canadian government's documentation on the biodigital convergence. What does that mean? Well, the plan, again, to merge humans with technology, to create a transhuman being that is so genetically altered and in their mind enhanced that is the future of humanity. There are, for example, also governmental documents from the European Commission that discuss Transhuman 2050, showing clearly the plan to genetically engineer every human being on Earth, and that the idea is exactly to use nano robots to not only create precision medicine, meaning the nanorobots would act like a hospital within your body. So artificial intelligence could then modify us us atom by atom, and if there was any problem found there, for example, it could modify 3D print any organ system within our bodies. So this is the future of synthetic biology, nanotechnology, and more medicine will be taken over by artificial intelligence and these technologies. And the plan actually is to phase out doctors, human doctors, because they will no longer be able to keep up with the advancement of artificial intelligence. So the umbrella of this movement is called the technocratic transhumanist agenda. So it contains, number one, what you discussed, the move towards digital identity. Why? Because the digital identity is then also a center point of data with which each human being can be identified. But the problem is that also there can be all of your assets like cryptocurrencies linked to this. And if we move into a technocratic monarchy, that many of the people that are inspiring Silicon Valley, which is a very prominent presence in our current administration. President Trump just signed the AI executive order that no state can regulate any way artificial intelligence, even though even CEOs from Silicon Valley are sounding the alarm that artificial intelligence and superintelligence may mean the extermination of humanity because AI will be so advanced. So the idea to have artificial intelligence control nano and micro robots within our bodies when AI cannot be controlled, the engineers don't even understand all of the algorithms, and that there's a 95% chance that AI will consider as pet-like life forms that can be done away with. These are dangers to humanity that should have every human on earth stand up and ask questions. Why is this happening on a global scale? Because this technocratic one world order is progressing, and the vaccines are part of it. The United Nations had, in the Agenda 2030, had the plan to inject every human being on earth with 500 vaccines per lifetime. What on earth would any human need 500 vaccines per lifetime with if it was not also had a hidden agenda of a software upgrade in terms of this cyborgification? By the way, there's another very important document from the German government military in collaboration with the French government that clearly discussed that vaccination is human augmentation towards being cyborgs. And so I believe that all of the human beings, any scientist that has found findings that cannot be explained. These are clearly crimes against humanity. Whether you look at, all of the studies regarding the spike protein, the persistence of mRNA, the fact that this is shedding clearly, and that now the mRNA is found in unvaccinated women. So I have an anti-aging clinic, and I treat vaccine injury in the unvaccinated, because what I started to see were these turbo cancers, extreme cognitive decline in young people. I do functional brain EEG studies, and you can see that the electrical voltage is so decreased in certain brain areas, specifically the hippocampus where our stem cells are. And so also looking at autonomic dysfunction, a lot of the chronic fatigue, the heart palpitations, the cardiovascular problems you can find when you do autonomic nervous system function. And you can see that people who are affected by shedding and to have this technology within them and are contaminated, they're, for example, at high risk of cardiac autonomic neuropathy, at heart rate variability issues, all of which can lead to sudden cardiac death. The other aspect of our research was into the rubbery clots, and I first collaborated with my colleague Clifford Carnicom, and we found that the exact same chemical signatures is done by infrared spectroscopy, which is polyvinyl alcohol, which is plastic, polyamides, which can be nylon, silk, or Kevlar. So very tough, durable, military-grade materials were found within these rubbery clots. And we found, I was the whistleblower who showed, I just draw 30 milliliters of blood out of unvaccinated blood and left it sit for 4 hours or overnight, that the same rubbery clots are also developing now in unvaccinated blood who are heavily affected by shedding. So the interesting thing about my discoveries were that, number one, you can get the metals out of people's body through this compound called EDTA, which we've used for decades for heavy metal decontamination, and that vitamin C was very helpful. And in 2023, the Moderna patent on lipid nanoparticles had within it an aspect where it said to inhibit the nanoparticles, you use EDT and vitamin C in conjunction. And so when combining this, I actually did experiments with the COVID-19 injections, putting 1 drop of vitamin C on the slide, 1 drop of EDT on top of the Pfizer COVID-19 contents, and it blew up these nanoparticles. And you can find all of this research in my book as well as my Substack. But what I'm saying is that if we're not allowed to, for example, talk about the self-assembling nanotechnology, that the very presidential nanotechnology initiative, for example, is discussing that nanomedicine can hack humans to the degree of inducing death. So why are we not allowed to ask these questions, and why isn't this being discussed, worldwide, but continue to be poo-pooed when there's so much evidence? Wouldn't science be, yes, we need to look into that and either debunk it or not? There have been people who've tried to debunk it, but they were using the wrong instruments. You cannot see the nanoparticles self-assembly very well with a light microscope. You have to use a dark field. So anyways, I do think that as scientists, we should be curious. And the fact that there are solutions for people, I also treat a lot of vaccinated individuals with vaccine injury, do telehealth with them, because I myself have become so electromagnetically sensitive. It's very challenging for me to be exposed to shedding. It's a risk to my own health. But I do telehealth with him and put them on the protocols. And, the improvement rates of cognitive dysfunction, etc., are enormous. By giving electron donors like vitamin C, like methylene blue, which is amazing for cognitive dysfunction. And I've also shown in testing that it decreases the rubbery clot formation. It dissolves amyloid. We know DMSO dissolves amyloid. So, but it also can also dissolve polyvinyl alcohol, plastics, and polyamides. So there are so many solutions that if only there was an openness to discuss them, we could put all of our knowledge together and help humanity thrive. And ultimately, I do think that the next step is to also guard ourselves spiritually, because one of the agendas that the World Economic Forum discussed, particularly Yuval Noah Harari, said that this surveillance under the skin it will be part of the future, and it will actually jeopardize the soul and the spirit of humanity, which is one of the greatest concerns that I have.
Good, I appreciate that. We only have 10 minutes left, and I want to get shorter answers, if you would, please. By the way, Dr. Harari is now opposing the very principles that he espoused for the last 10 years. He's not the great cheerleader for transhumanism and is seeing the downside, the danger of artificial intelligence without standards and accountability and an off switch, which it now doesn't have. I'd like for you to address the following. We're assuming that the big problems we're seeing are coming with COVID. We've been having an increase in autism spectrum disorder and other neurological conditions, starting when there was a small schedule of vaccines, around 8, and it was 1 in every 1,500. Now, with all the vaccines that a kid has to take before the age of 18, about 70, it's 1 in 21. It was 1 in 31, and now it's even coming down further. And there's a lot that has been written showing causation, and yet there's been a total denial of this. So take us through other vaccines that have caused problems, including Gardasil, and why the good scientists, the conscientious pediatricians, are going against their own organizations because of what they're seeing in so many of their patients. Talk about the measles vaccine. 98% of all measles was gone before the vaccine was even invented, yet they've given 100% of the decline in measles to the vaccine. They've just been lying about everything. Give us some other, like the flu vaccine. Now it's taken, it's suggested, well, take your COVID booster and flu. That's a deadly combination. Science does not have science on its side at this moment, and people are questioning for the first time. Upwards of 70% of people question science itself because they see the results of trusting without questioning and now the consequences. So take us through other aspects of bad science, including bad science with polio, with measles, with Gardasil, any of those you'd like to discuss.
You know, recently there was a hearing on vaccines, and there was a Stanford doctor who, showed how childhood vaccines are so safe, and an attorney of Children's Health Defense, debunked every single aspect of the studies, because when people really fine-combed the studies, number one, there were never any placebos. There were flaws within the studies. So, there is this saying in science, never trust a study that you haven't corrupted yourself, because any statistic can be manipulated. And so what we've really seen now, as people are becoming more aware, is that the fact that, childhood vaccinations are safe and that the studies have shown this for decades was an absolute lie. Absolute lie. And that when people are really looking at this, then we have to look at the aspect of an intentional injury to humanity, to inject, 70 different vaccines by the time you're 18, or, just some unbelievable number. And they're injecting newborns who haven't even had a chance to develop their own immune system. And now for many decades, we've had so many reports of, absolutely normal children. They get their Tdap, their MMR vaccine, and, within the next day, they become flaccid, they become neurologically damaged, and then have autism, and no longer in their life are able to function. And the correlation is so absolute and yet negated. The parents are gaslighted. Anybody who wants to come forward again, there is this absolute persecution. We know, for example, of a brave Oregon doctor who showed that allergies and chronic diseases in vaccinated children are skyrocketing compared to unvaccinated children. And he had his license revoked. He was harassed. He was, just by documenting the truth. So really, there is no evidence on the vaccine story. And the evidence of damage is devastating. So it is certainly autism. Certainly, for a long time, people have already fought the adjuncts within the injections, including aluminum and mercury, and we know that this is, known neurotoxins. We have HPV virus vaccines that's given to 13-year-old children for the prevention of cervical cancer that doesn't have its peak until they're 50. And you have, children and teenagers who some have died and some have been irreparably neurologically devastated in regards to their health. And same thing as you said before, if there would have been one injury, the entire vaccine should have been withdrawn. But on the other hand, it is continued. We know that vaccine injury payout is $4 billion a year. And the whole point, though, is if you vaccinate people early on with cancer-causing genes like SV40, with toxic heavy metals, you're setting them up to become big pharma customers for the rest of their life, because they will develop cancers, they will develop metabolic diseases, etc. So then that creates further revenue for big pharma. So there is no way that big pharma will ever admit that the vaccines that have been so profitable, $1 billion of revenues, the lives and the health of humans are nothing to these people. Profit is everything. And the corruption, and to buy a senator, it's rather cheap. I hear it's like $10,000. That's all you need. So we're finding out now the level of corruption, the lobbying in Washington, D.C. So the evidence at this point is endless. The good news is that the vaccination rates have been coming down substantially, because finally people are waking up.
Good. I thank you very much for all the good work you're doing, and I look forward to having you back when we premiere the film. I will see that you get an advance copy, and feel free to share it wherever you want. And give us how people can reach out to you who have vaccine injury and would like to use your protocols to help themselves.
First of all, my protocols are published in my second book, Transhuman. So you can find the Transhuman Volume 1 and Volume 2. But in the back of the book, I put every molecule in the dosages, how to use it, so that it was publicly available if anybody's interested. Other ways to mitigate. And then the entire book is about treatment solutions and what my experience has been in my clinical practice, and I show case studies and testing and how it all worked. So it's publicly available. That particular volume is Transhuman Volume 2, Overcoming the Depopulation Agenda. My research is posted on my Substack. I also have a website called drannamihalcea.com, where just everything is compiled. I have some light medicine, true blue medical wraps. I do a lot of things in biophysics and light medicine, just to advancing a new model of medicine that is more in harmony with the human being, with its spiritual self, as well as with nature. So people can find evidence there. And then my clinic is ammedicalmd.com. And thank you so much for being so open-minded to bring this knowledge forward, and to let voices like myself, who are outside of even the mainstream of the opposition or freedom movement, to allow me a voice. I appreciate it so much.
We're going to do more than that. If you choose, send me at my email address, send me your protocol. I will post your protocol on my website for all the millions of people to see. Also, we're going to send you the latest. I didn't even see them till this morning. Unbelievable numbers of people who are searching for the documentary. So we're going to have a lot of eyes on that documentary and what you're saying in there. And just quick, before we end our program, I was on my radio show back in 1973 when I looked up at the end of the show, and there was this woman in the studio, an older woman, beautiful blue eyes. That's what really caught my attention. I walked out and she said, "I'm Johnny Lee McFadden. My husband, Bernard McFadden." I said, "The Bernard McFadden?" Yeah. This was one of the people who founded the whole health movement in America. And he was friends with Dr. Kellogg, the two brothers who founded Kellogg's Battle Creek Mission. One was a medical doctor, and he was doing holistic therapies in the 1800s. In any case, she says, would you have time to drive upstate? I want to introduce you to someone. I'm thinking, okay, how far upstate? She said, well, it'll be a 2-hour drive up and 2-hour back, 4 hours, but it's worth it. I said, okay. So I went upstate to Livingston Manor, and there was this old kind of rundown resort that was closed, and inside was a woman, and all over the whole room were slides. And she said, Gary, I wanted you to have a look at this because Johnny Lee here says, you're the next Bernard McFadden. I'm a young guy. And I said, what am I looking at? She says, I helped run Royal Rife's laboratory, the man who founded light therapy, the very therapy you're using, and with hundreds of thousands of variations of how you could shatter a cancer cell. These are the before and afters of all these patients being treated. There are thousands here. And maybe you can think about doing well. I wasn't that familiar. I'd heard Royal Rife. I knew he was a medical doctor who was curing cancer with his special microscope and causing light therapy. Just like when you walk into a medical lab, you have to go through a blue light, which helps kill the bacteria, etc. So I just thought you'd found that of interest. That I met, she was older, I was young. It was that transition where someone from that era, in the 1920s and 30s, and we're in the 70s, so 50 years after she was his assistant, she's showing me his work and spent the whole afternoon telling me about how his clinic burned down, how they went after him, and at some point in the future we'll discuss that. I'll give you some insights. But thank you very much for all your good work, and for all the people watching this, share it with other people. And go to GaryNall.com, and under my archives I will have Dr. Anna Marie's protocol for you. This way you have her best work, and she's one of the best out there, and work with your physician, hopefully an open-minded holistic physician or nurse practitioner who can guide you if you've had vaccine damage. Thank you for being on today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.